Hey, thanks for coming to my talk. I'm Dominica DeGrandis, and today I'm going to be talking about making work visible, making connections visible, and how to defrag your value stream. When I mentioned this to a friend, they said, well, if you're going to put defrag in your talk, you should probably define that for the younger folks in the audience. See a few younger folks. So, back in the day, before solid state drives came around, the files that made up, on the disk would, over time, deteriorate. They become fragmented, and the OS had to run around the disk to retrieve the file, and that consumed a lot of time. So we had to run this defrag utility to clean things up, to make accessing files faster. Well, if you look at the value stream, when people have to run around the value stream to get what they need to do their job, it consumes a lot of time. And so that's why I want to talk about, what is the point here, is that a defrag value stream improves flow. And as most of you probably know, flow is the first way of DevOps, because delivering value to customers quickly requires the fast, smooth flow of work across the value stream, especially if you work in a large company or if your company is growing. Right? If you've got hundreds or thousands of engineers building, dozens or hundreds of products, and you're probably using dozens or maybe even hundreds of different tools and different processes, then it can take a long time, if you're doing mergers and acquisitions. So the work you're doing is complex, and as humans, we deal with that by breaking things down into smaller pieces, and which is how silos and specialization get introduced. The hardest thing we do is communicate across teams. For example, when your network engineering team is chasing down, they're involved in a production incident resolution for Project X, and their work isn't in the same tool, or it's just not available to other teams. And maybe Project Y or Team Y is running around the value stream looking for a network engineer to help them troubleshoot their DNS issue. Problems like that end up being invisible dependencies, and it slows things down and delays stuff. So in order to solve that problem, to try and improve that flow, we need to find and fix the fragmented work, right? These disconnected conversations that are or are not happening across the value stream. And that's how we start defragging. That's how we can find and fix flow problems. And when I talk about value stream, I'm talking about all the activities, like from ideate all the way over to operate, and the things we do to protect production. So 3 things today that I want to bring up. One is that complexity drives necessary specialization, because as companies are growing and we've got these independent teams, we end up with experts. And then the specialization, though, increases the coordination costs, because if Team X is working on something and Team Y is working on something else, likely their priorities aren't the same and people aren't available when you need them. And then thirdly, I want to leave you with an exercise that I've been using to help people bring visibility to this. It's about making the work visible so that it can provoke necessary conversations that we need for change. So when you look at the whole value stream from ideate to operate, if the flow is poor, then it slows down delivery. It reduces your flow time, which is what I like to call, what some people would call lead time or cycle time. This is a value stream from Barclays. This is, pulled this from a talk that a gentleman named John Smart gave at DevOps Enterprise Summit in London last year. And he's trying to display the problem. So you can see, things are going really well in dev, right? Development has optimized their work, yay. But upstream, it's a monthly triage process for work coming in. It's a quarterly steering review committee and it's an annual budgeting approval cycle. So if you want to get something done in 2020, you have to have budgets submitted and approved early to mid 2019. You know, Barclays is a bank. There's a lot of banks. I mean, are we really so sure about the market conditions 12 months prior to when we're able to work on the work? And then downstream, they've got, you know, monthly integration and quarterly releases. How can you say that you're agile or doing DevOps when you've got this kind of delay in the value stream? So it doesn't matter how agile or how good we're doing at DevOps in one piece of the value stream if the teams, you know, I mean, Dev can deliver quickly, but if the bottleneck is somewhere else, right, it doesn't really matter. So thing number one, let's talk about complexity drives necessary specialization. This is Kameli, my granddaughter, and she was 9, so about a year and a half ago. She's going to 4 different therapists. She's going to a speech therapist because she cannot pronounce G or S, and it's hard to understand what she's saying. She's going to a physical therapist because her balance is off, and so she can't ride a bicycle. She's going to an occupational therapist because it's hard for her to grasp her pencil, so her writing is hard to read. She starts out at the primary care physician, but they don't have all the knowledge and experience needed. They don't know everything they need to know about the human body, and so they pretty much just send you off to specialists to help. But none of these therapists were able to help Melly. So about a year ago, we stumbled across this TED Talk from this expert specialist doctor in New York. We live in Seattle, but last February, off to New York we went because we started recognizing by watching lots and lots of YouTubes and observing her behavior that she just ever so subtly was showing indicators of this rare form of cerebral palsy. And this expert in New York had done a lot with cerebral palsy. So we went there for this 5-day intensive session. And on day 2, Melly, they put a hand splint on her and an arm sleeve, which helped her form holding the pencil. Day 2, she is writing legibly. And on day 4, a similar occurrence happened with her speech. It was just truly remarkable. My daughter had spent 7 years trying to figure out what the heck was going on, going around to all these different, you know, therapists, and everywhere you go, you got to fill out the same information on all the different forms, and because the different therapists aren't talking to each other, and the onus is on the parent to communicate all that information. So it's like they're not looking at the human as like a whole value stream, as a whole person, right? They're just, all these therapists are like they're individual silos like we're doing in IT. So 100 years ago, there were 2 health practitioners. You had the doctor and the nurse. And now we have over 120 medical specialties and subspecialties. When we look at IT, it's sort of similar. If you look back in the 2000s, there was 1 security person. But over the last 15 years, breaches and hacks have just gotten out of control. And here it's going to go up to 2017. The color of the circle shows the severity of the breach, and the size of the circle shows how many folks were impacted by it. And so security issues, as most of you all know, are happening in the most unpredictable ways. You know, when someone logs onto your network and gets the SSL cert and traces it back to the build server, and that provides access to GitHub, and that allows people to download the code. And that's a true story from a large software company. Basically because they had this single point vulnerability that occurred, ironically, while they're putting continuous delivery in place. So there's more security layers and policies that require expertise, and the complexity of cybersecurity is resulting in an industry crisis. There is 0% unemployment right now in cybersecurity. And Symantec expects the demand for cybersecurity experts to be at 6 million this year. And there's another study that shows that by 2021, we're going to have a 3.5 million person gap, skill set gap for security. So I used to work at Corbis, which isn't too far from here, for many years. My background, I was a build engineer. I did a lot of configuration management and automated builds and deployments and a lot of releases. And you know, we do a release back then, maybe big releases, maybe quarterly, and something would invariably go wrong, and we'd have to get a hot fix out fast. So we sort of, you know, get the hot fix out fast to stop the bleeding in production. But then when we would try and fix that hot fix, you know, that fix would have to go in the backlog, and it would sit there and wait, because it was hard to get approval to fix technical debt. And then we could be doing a release 12 months later, and now we have to put out a hot fix for the hot fix that's been in production for 12 months. So it's reasons like that that these grassroots orgs like I Am the Calvary efforts are in high demand. An example of I Am the Calvary is the work. So their work focuses on the intersection of computer security and human life. So an example of the work that they're doing is they're trying to reduce life-threatening situations due to hackable medical devices. And Josh Corman's group got interviewed for Time Magazine this year. Big article in Time Magazine about the risk from hackable medical devices. In this specific case, there was an infusion pump in hospitals that allowed cyber attackers to take control of it. And the FDA and DHS, Department of Homeland Security, shut it down because of I Am the Calvary. So clearly, there's a need for more security experts. But according to this survey from DevSecOps, developers don't have time to spend on security. 48% of developers saying they don't have enough time to spend on security. And not all devs want to do security. I mean, 20% here are saying, not my job. So like the primary care physicians, developers don't have the bandwidth to know everything there is to know. Right? It's hard enough just to stay current in your own area of expertise. 15 years ago, we had the one security person. Now we've got, you know, the top 10 security roles here. So the bigger your company grows, the more experts and specialization there is, which leads to thing number 2, and that we've got this necessary specialization, but wow, does it increase coordination costs. If we look at the healthcare delivery roadmap, we have all these specialists. So say you have a heart condition, you go see your primary care doctor, and they say, well, let's send you to the lab to get some blood work, and you make an appointment and go there, and you go back to your primary care doctor, and he says, well, you should go see a cardiologist, and then you go make another appointment, go see the cardiologist. He says, this data doesn't look good, you know, here's a prescription, go to the pharmacy, get some blood thinners, and you should go see a dietitian because you've been eating too much bacon, and you know, you're too overweight, and then you got to go to the physical therapist to exercise, and if this keeps going down this path, you might end up in the hospital with a coronary, and everywhere you go, you got to fill out the same data in all these different systems and deal with all this different insurance paperwork. It's like duplicate entry times 6. We think it's bad in IT. It's really bad in the medical industry. Like, there's no holistic, big picture view of the patient. It's like you got to go running around this whole value stream to get the information you need to help your family members. And there's a cost to this. So my mom has a heart condition, and she got admitted into the hospital. She had to take this adenosine heart stress test. And the doctor said, no coffee 24 hours before the test. So first thing in the morning, the nurse gives my mom coffee, probably because my mom is impossible without her double latte caramel whatever. And she can't take the test. So she has to spend a whole nother night in the hospital, which is not the cheapest place to stay. And then the next morning, they get her miraculously through the morning without coffee, and they wheel her down into the nuclear medicine area, where the pharmacy tech hands the nuclear medicine tech the wrong stuff. So instead of the heart tracker that the doctor ordered, my mom gets shot up with a bone tracker. And yet again, she cannot take this test that she needs to take. And because bad things happen in threes, I said, Mom, like, we got to get out of here. Like, this is just not a safe place for you to be. Medical errors are the third leading cause of death in the US, 250,000 a year, according to this Johns Hopkins study. Well, when we look at the software delivery roadmap, it can appear organized like this. You've got your portfolio level up on top, and there's this hierarchical view where the portfolio breaks down into different programs, which then break down into the individual team work. But the details can get lost as work spreads out across the org, especially when unknown dependencies pop up. So I used to work at this huge retail place, and they had this concept of an away story because there were so many dependencies. An away story, so they've got hundreds of agile teams. An away story is a story that you create when you have to go away to another team, right? You have to go chase down the value stream to get the information you need to do your job. They had so many away stories. It just made it almost impossible to see and hear, all the different communication and dependencies that impacted different teams. So they were invisible, and this delayed the work and made them unpredictable. And so I was talking to a friend about this, and they said, well, we have full stack engineers on our team. Like, they do everything. They're supposed to be able to do everything. So I started looking into this with a few other folks from the DevOps community, because you're doing DevOps, you build it, you own it, right? So that means you need full stack engineers. Right? So what exactly is the stack, and how far up and down does it go? Does a full stack developer really know the entire stack? Well, Stack Overflow has a survey showing developers who consider themselves full stack engineers. That's grown from 29% in 2013 to 52%. So over half of the developers who replied to the Stack Overflow survey are saying they're full stack engineers or developers. Then we pulled out some full stack engineer job descriptions. This one's from SkillGeeks. And we started, going through this, wondering who all, where are these people? And then somebody, well, they're all at Netflix, so they're not available for your company. Even if you do have all these skill sets, and you take, what happens when you take on a new job, and they're just getting Kubernetes up and running. So now you got to learn Kubernetes, which is not the easiest thing to learn. Now do you really have time to go learn Clojure? Because Clojure developers make, they're like the 90 percentile in the pay scale. Or do you have time to go learn Big O notation? Because a decision to do one thing is a decision to delay something else. So if you're going to try and do all of that, there's a cost to that. Just like medical professionals don't have time or the bandwidth to know every single thing there is to know about the human body, I would argue that developers are in that same boat. And when people try and do that, the costs are high. So the Maslach burnout inventory is considered the gold standard for measuring burnout, which they define as lost energy, enthusiasm, and confidence. This topic's being talked about a lot, so I'm not going to go into it. It's a real problem in our industry. Dr. Christina Maslach is who John Willis pulled in to speak at the DevOps Enterprise Summit in Vegas last year. And so I put a link in here to her YouTube where she goes into it. And then there's a second link here with a link to the inventory survey. You could actually go out to her website and give your team this survey or take it personally. It doesn't cost very much at all. It's like $15 if you want to take it yourself just to see sort of where you're at. Because my observations is that people are so crammed with work during the day, running from meeting to meeting and fighting fires, that there's just not really any good time during the working day to get work done. So then when do people get their work done? They get it done at midnight, right? Or Sunday afternoon, or because then you have a chunk of uninterrupted time that you can focus on the work that you're doing. So check out those links below if you want. Okay, number 3, how to visualize handoffs and dependencies. On the healthcare side, we're seeing a lot of disruption with this right now. There's, how many of you are using MyChart or even heard of it? Okay, yeah, so it's an app, and if your medical provider is uploading your data in there, it's sort of a one-shot place to go to get all your information and make appointments and see lab result tests and a whole bunch more. And then we've got new companies like Livongo, who are taking the approach of looking at the human body like the whole value stream. Let's look at the whole person instead of just sending them off to all these different specialists who only know one slice of what they're working on. And then Amazon Comprehend Medical, which is processing, improving medical language with machine learning. They're able to actually reduce the time it takes in clinical trials for cancer down to just minutes, what used to take hours. If we look at technology disruption, well, so my first job out of university, I was doing builds on IBM mainframes, and we were using, JCL, C, COBOL, assembly language, and mag tapes, right? And now, you're looking at the Zebia Labs chart, there's over 120 DevOps tools in their periodic table of tools. And then it's just DevOps tools. So the reality of this situation is people are busy, everybody's working in their own silo, in their own team. Each team uses a different tool, which don't really talk to each other that well. Maybe they do, but maybe not. And there's this lack of integration. So different people have different views of the world. If I'm working in service management, my view of the world is in ServiceNow. If I was in quality management, then my view of the world was in Quality Center. If I'm in portfolio management, then my view of the world was in PlanView. And if I was in development, then my view of the world was in Jira. But there's really only one view of the truth, as we constantly have to translate this in order to get our story straight. And so the communication, this is what I'm seeing. It's done manually through handoffs, through emails, through Slack channels, through spreadsheets, and status meetings. Right? Like we all have a value stream, but we tend not to design it or architect it the way that we would architect products. And so we see tool fights break out. I was speaking at another local bank, credit union, and I attended their Agile session. There was a big Agile session, how they can collaborate better, and one guy's going on about how they're in TFS and it's getting better, and then from the other side of the room, well, you should work in ServiceNow. Just come on over to ServiceNow, and this fight breaks out in this collaborative Agile session about people. So in the DevOps community, we're telling folks, let people use the best tool to do their job, right? If you make people standardize and everybody uses this one tool over here, that's telling people that they can't use the best tool to do their job. So it's a challenge for sure. But we see this on the business side too. It's just not on IT. I was working with the sales ops team. These are the people who do NDAs and statement of works and terms and conditions and contracts, so salespeople can sell things. And I asked them, where does your work come from? How does work arrive? And they said, well, we get emails. Okay, then what happens? Well, we copy the info out of the email and we paste it into Jira, because that's what we're using. Okay, well, then what happens? Well, salespeople hate Jira and they use Salesforce. So we copy the stuff from Jira after we've worked on it back into an email, and then we email the salespeople. And so emails go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, and details get lost. The handoffs aren't as clear or clean as they should be, and it just impacts communication and collaboration and delays delivery. Things take too long is just a universal problem, I think. And with this, I wanted to do this survey to ask you, how do you communicate your handoffs? So whip out a browser, whip out your phone, and go to menti.com. Menti.com, and you want to use code 426693. 426693. How do you communicate? You can put in up to two responses. Not seeing any. Oh, there we go. I was too impatient. OK. This is sometimes how I collect data. I just like the open cloud format so people can put in whatever they want to really see where the trend is. Telepathy.
You're probably right.
Zoom, Slack, tickets, email, verbal, so shoulder taps. You got 5 minutes? Guess I do now because you just interrupted me. Confluence. This is like half a minute. Yeah. All right. Thank you very much. OK, what to do about all this? So Carmen Diardo and I co-authored this. We call it the Value Stream Canvas exercise. And here's something for you to check out. We're really trying to help teams visualize the problems as work moves through the value stream. Where are the handoffs that are problematic? How do we make these connections, these handoffs visible? Because we want to provoke necessary conversations. You know, once you can see work up on the wall and you've got the right people in the room, it does spark good conversation and help people learn what they can do to improve. And I like to start with production. So a lot of times when people start doing value stream, this is kind of like value stream mapping, but not really. But when people do value stream mapping, they tend to start on the left on when a request first comes in. I often like to start on the right because if there's an incident in production, that's maybe the highest risk for the business right now. So what you need is the people in the room who are actually hands on the keyboard, who do the work in the value stream. And you start asking them, how does work arrive? You know, does an alert arrive via a monitoring tool? Like, how do incidents actually arrive? Does somebody call somebody? Do you email somebody? Does it get created in your ITSM tool? So we're trying to identify where work incidents originate from to help everybody see the big picture. And when we ask what happens with vulnerabilities, if a vulnerability needs development work, like how do developers attend to those? You know, does an SRE ping a developer through an internal Slack channel or a chat channel? We ask this, well, no, they just show up in Jira. Like, what do you mean they just show up in Jira? Well, you know, we just look in the backlog and there's this security issue there. It's just there. Sometimes people have no idea how their work shows up in their backlog. And when we dig into it, we find out that, well, actually, Bob runs a security scan in White Hat, and then Chris exports that manually, and then Jessica imports it manually into Jira. And so this example helps teams across the value stream see how their work is related to each other and how it ties back to the release pipeline. You know, where does dev hand their work off to? Where do changes get checked in? Are you using Git, GitHub, GitLab? How does that work? The week before last, I was on the East Coast helping another bank, it's like the year of the banks, do this value stream canvas exercise. So I said, okay, let's take a look at a production incident. You know, what happens? Well, it was a network capacity issue. And what happens? Well, a network engineer gets paged at 2:30 in the morning, right? Because they have to do all network engineering updates, releases have to be done at midnight. That's their policy. And so an incident comes in, somebody gets called on the pager duty, they put up a conference call, and that creates a change that needs to be happened. But they do like resolve it. They put a Band-Aid out to fix it, and then they create a problem in ServiceNow, and then they have a big Zoom, so everybody can get on the Zoom to figure out what they're going to do about it. After the Zoom, somebody writes up meetings in a Word document that then becomes input to what I'll just say Jira number 1. It becomes a story in Jira number 1. And then it splits off into a variety of ways, and one way is that it has to, you know, the end result is they're trying to upgrade a circuit from 5 to 10 gigabytes. All the rest of that is just trying to upgrade from 5 to 10 gigabytes for a new circuit. And so part of the work has to go to finance, because they have to do procurement and get approval for that. Part of it winds down because it impacts 3 or more teams, so you've got a Jira 2 and a Jira 3, and stories get created there, and emails are going back and forth. And you know, eventually they've got things in order, and now it's got to go to CAB. It's got to sit and wait for the change approval board. And the senior director of engineering and operations is in the room when we're doing this. And people are just, their jaws are dropping because they don't realize that this is what other people and other teams have to do just to do this simple change. What should, you know, what would hopefully be able to be done in just a few hours takes 6 weeks because of this. And because we had leadership in the room looking at this, the net result of this was getting buy-in at a very high level to conduct some experiments in order to optimize this whole value stream. Not just optimize one piece of it, but optimize the whole thing. So that's what they're working on now. And so that's just one piece of this exercise. It's the front end, or actually, I mean, I call it the front end, but most people look at that as the back end. The other side of it is, let's do the same thing, but from a business request perspective. How does that feature arrive? Do they arrive via some intake tool? Is there a big PMO, program management office, that's in control of that? And what tools are they using? And where does that happen? What about work that comes in from Salesforce? You know, then what? And so it's the same thing, where you would draw your, usually we'll use like ideate, create, release, and operate, but whatever terminology you use in your workplace, and just show how typical business requests flow through, starting at the very beginning, and how does that feature arrive and what happens next. And then often we just do it on a whiteboard, just sort of looks like this, and we intentionally put in the communication handoffs, whether that's Slack or Gmail or whatever, to show the delays that can happen while we're waiting on communication. So, yeah, Value Stream Canvas exercise. You can get it off of IT Revolution's website. I'll have a link to it at the end. Basically, how to find out where you and your team fit into the value stream, how to make problems visible so that we can start doing something about it. And I mean, it's a way for you to see how people are running around the value stream. Things get delayed, just trying to get their job done. So the benefits we've seen be pretty transformative. You get speed, right? Your deployment lead time, your cycle time, flow time tends to improve. You don't have to dig through email, once you make some of those corrections, you don't have to dig through email to find important information. And you don't have to race around the disk drive so much to collect the info you need. So in my career, I've probably had every chance to be or find an interface between two silos. I mean, the problem is so important that you have to find some way to communicate. There's no other way. And I've worked between engineering and ops, and between sales, ops, and sales, and product and development, and just on and on. And everywhere you go, there's this problem. So I just want to encourage people, just like Cirque du Soleil, trapeze artists have good synchronized handoffs. So should your value stream. If you would like a copy of this deck, just send an email to dominica@sendyourslides.com. Put flow in the subject, and you'll get an automated email with a bunch of stuff, including a link to this and some excerpts of my book, Making Work Visible, and videos of what we do at TaskTop. TaskTop is an integration infrastructure platform. And yes, I did bring more no, less whip stickers with me. So if you want some of those, I'll have them out in a visible place. Thank you. Any questions? Sir?
So is integration between a lot of those tools kind of solve a lot of those problems, or do you find that there's like more that needs to happen, like to kind of get people?
There's always more that needs to happen, because when it solves a lot. It reduces a lot of the duplicate data entry, and it automatically shows up in the team's preferred tool of choice. But we still need some policies around that, right? I mean, how is this all going to work? And discussions on, where the bottleneck is. 'Cause there's a bottleneck somewhere, right? And finding that, if you have some tools that aren't able to integrate, and one of them is your bottleneck, we still got to work on that. Yeah. Alrighty, okay, go.
I guess I have one more. Like, how do you deal? Maybe there's not a great answer, but like, how do you deal when there's like, it's clear that like a person or process is the bottleneck, and not necessarily because of like any tooling?
Sure. Yeah.
Like, I've run into that a lot.
Yeah. My observations, there's just lots of change happening, and I'm seeing a lot of PMOs. I'm seeing a lot of organizations moving from project to product. So instead of having a PMO, so the PM BOC is sort of not really helping anybody's career right now. And because when you're organized by projects, everybody forms into a project, and then when they go to hand off, so they get the project in production, but maybe half the team moves on to the next project already. So instead, we're looking at organizations being organized by the product. So the knowledge stays with the product as it's designed, as it's built, as it's delivered, and as it's maintained and sustained. That's probably one of the biggest changes that we're seeing, is that big shift. Sir?
Do you have any advice for performing value stream maps when maybe you don't have the opportunity to get everybody in the room?
You start where you are. So with the network engineering and operations teams last week, we didn't have everybody in the room, but we had, if you can at least get folks from 3 teams, who's ever upstream from you and who's ever downstream from you. At least you can start there and gain some momentum, maybe do an experiment. And if you get a win out of it, and your VP gets wind of it, and things are moving faster, now you start getting a lot of attention, and other people want to do that too. Like, I want to join that team now. Sir?
Following up on that, do you have tips on how much time to set aside to take on with these groups doing value stream mapping to build them out?
So, so I do what I call value stream canvas exercise, and it's usually a day, or this is what I do. So I do a lot of coaching and workshops that are 1, 2, or 3 days, and it's just a quick way, if you have the right people in the room, to get something up and running. I think the formal value stream mapping tends to take like 6 months of prep time, and there's just a lot of work that's done there, and a lot of organizations don't want to wait that long. They just want to jump in and see what they can do now. Did I answer your question?
Yes, that's exactly what
Okay, yeah. Sir?
In working with industries like contract-based or where the revenue streams are aligned with products,
Yeah.
it's often very obvious to such people that they need to align themselves along value streams. But in my experience, groups like Central Human Resources, Central IT, groups whose revenue streams tend to break down by organizational silos rather than products or delivering services, they tend to have an almost antithetical attitude when it comes to the idea that they've actually organized themselves around delivering a specific service. They suffer from a lot of this. You can draw up a diagram that shows multiple steps. You can show that people on both sides of the handoff roll their eyes at how terrible it is. But the idea that we might want to fund this entire system a different way is almost horrifying to many of these people. And that's the one huge hurdle I yet to get over, is how do I address the funding issue that kind of isolates them from the consequences of not optimizing the value streams.
Yeah, you've just brought up one of the accounting is one of the last organizations to try and move toward a more lean accounting style. There are some out there that are doing it, but that's the problem. It's, no, I got my budget, that's it. Because Howard, tell me how you're going to measure me, and I'll tell you how I'm going to behave. At every 12 months, you're going to give me this budget. There is zero incentive for somebody to share their budget, because what happens if they don't use their budget that year? Oh, I see, you collaborated with this team. I guess you didn't need 30% of that budget. Let's take that away from you. So until budgets can be pulled together, and if we can switch the mindset from what you've just described to funding by product or funding by value stream, then that can help lead people in that direction. And instead of doing it annually, can we do that at least quarterly? So if a new good idea comes up in the middle of the year, we'd be able to fund it, put a value stream team together for that, and make it happen. There are some people who are working in that area and bringing visibility to it and talking about it. And it is, Mick Kirsten talks about it in his book, Project to Product. And I think Carmen Diardo talks about it in his book. And at the DevOps Enterprise Summit in London this year, I forget which company, but they're bringing their CFO to help explain how they made that transition, how we moved from long-term budgeting cycles by project to shorter-term funding by product. So it's starting to happen. All right. Thank you so much, everyone.